This video is going to be the biggest example of me caring about things that other people don't give a crap about. Or maybe they do, I'm not entirely sure. But the MVP race this season is pretty heavy, and I'm not going to show Westbrook or Harden for the intro because, I don't know, I'm a weirdo. And it could be one of the closest that the NBA has ever seen, but I think one thing that gets overlooked a little bit is who will finish 5th place in MVP voting. Often used as a thing where it's like, yeah, you're not the MVP, but it's a nice, like, show of gratitude for the season that you still had. And I think there are a few candidates, definitely. I would put Giannis Antetokounmpo on that list. He has elevated himself to one of the best players in the NBA. I saw some stat where he was like the first player to ever get a certain number of basically every single stat that you can put up in basketball, so that's pretty damn cool. Isaiah Thomas, the offensive responsibility that he has for the Boston Celtics is pretty ridiculous, and when he's not in the game, they can go potato when it comes to scoring. But I also think his playmaking has been good enough for what they ask him to do, and I mean, we'll dive into all these guys more into detail. Then there's John Wall, and when we're talking about playmaking, he is right up there among the James Hardens, the LeBrons, the Westbrooks, the Chris Paul. All those guys, you got to put John Wall right in that conversation for best passers in the NBA. And the leadership that he has shown for this Wizards team over the past few seasons has been awesome. Rudy Gobert, defensively, he's just ridiculous. Very well could win Defensive Player of the Year, but his offensive contribution is also pretty damn good as well for the Utah Jazz. Jimmy Butler, who has been around one of the more dysfunctional situations in the NBA today, and among all of it, he has been able to maintain Chicago and get them into the postseason. And then finally, Steph Curry, a guy who has been a little bit of a disappointment by his own standards this season, but still great by normal ones. And before we go into detail about those guys, I want to talk about some other guys who I feel are just not really up to these guys' level for 5th place in MVP. Let's talk about Chris Paul. He simply missed too many games. He was fantastic in the games that he played, but when he only played about 60, I think it kind of takes you out of the running. I think the same thing could be said for Kyle Lowry, who also played around 60 games. Now, when we talk about Kyle Lowry's teammate in DeMar DeRozan, he had a crap ton of points this season, but he doesn't lead Toronto's offense the way that Isaiah or Curry lead their team's offense because of his lack of playmaking, and also he's not as dangerous with the ball is not in his hands. Defensively, he still isn't that great. I just think DeRozan's all-around game is not strong enough to put him in this conversation, but I will still recognize that, yeah, the guy had a hell of a season for Toronto. Anthony Davis would be perhaps the best player among this entire video, but unfortunately, the guy just lost too many games with the Pelicans. If we look at Damian Lillard, his is interesting because I feel like, he and the Blazers, they definitely turned it around after the Nurkic trade, but this team was under 500 so often throughout this season. At one point, minus 10 games at the trade deadline. By Christmas time, they were like minus 7 or 8 games on the season. Like, Jimmy Butler's Bulls had a tough year. At least they were around 500. You could say basically the same thing for Giannis and the Bucks. For Paul George, the lack of playmaking kills him for me. On top of, there was a stretch this season where he just was flat out not good in the month of February. He's been fantastic to close out the season, but I think just being not good in February and only okay to start the season, I think that hurts PG too much. So now let's talk about our 6 candidates. With Isaiah Thomas, I mentioned before the responsibility he has. The near 30 points a game, being the only guy who can create his own shot. Ridiculous in the 4th quarter, while also still being a decent playmaker at about 6 a game. Isaiah's just been impossible to stop for NBA defenses this season. And I think what's allowed him to really take the next step, besides just being awesome himself, are a couple things. I will say, I do appreciate his pull-up three-pointer, because every time he shoots one, I'm like, why the hell are you shooting that? And then it goes in. But anyway, one thing that's helped him out this season is he's been used off-ball more often. Last season, it was a whole lot of Isaiah running the pick and rolls and all that. And of course, that's there this season, but there's more just like him cutting or him coming off of screens or getting a handoff play. Things that get him more momentum to get open from his defender. And, I mean, you only give him just a little bit of free space and he's going to score on you. But I also think another thing that's helped him out has been Al Horford, honestly. Horford's a fantastic playmaker, averaging around 5 assists a game as a big man, which I think has been a little underrated for him this season. And I'm pretty sure I said that like a day ago, but whatever. But Horford's spacing that he provides has also been helping Isaiah out a lot. So the carry job that Thomas has done for the Celtics, allowing them the one guy who can force his own offense and get everybody else going, he's been very good. Now, if we get to the Utah Jazz here and Rudy Gobert, George Hill played about 49 games this season. Rodney Hood missed a significant amount of time. Derek Favors has been playing on one leg all season. And even throughout all that, the Jazz are the third best defensive team in the NBA, 51 wins, and Rudy Gobert was a huge reason for that. I'm talking about his defense, but he's dunking the ball. It's okay, don't worry about it. Gobert was number 1 in blocks per game, but the thing with him is really just the intimidating factor he has. The amount of shots that he deflects or just simply alters because guys are not in their comfort zone when they drive to the rim, or they're just flat out too afraid to drive to the rim because he's around there. I mean, that value is just huge. And then offensively, the way he rolls to the rim, finishes around 70% from the basket, also grabs over 4 offensive rebounds a game, attempts about 5 or 6 free throws a game where he shoots nearly 70%. His offense has been damn good, and his defense has been ridiculous. Now on to Steph Curry. I mentioned it before, like, yeah, he fell back down to earth this season as compared to last year when he put up 30 points a game and was 50, 40, 90 from the field while attempting like 11 three-pointers a game. It was simply unheard of, the offensive season the guy had last year. This season, still 25 points a game, 47 from the field, 41% from 3 while taking 10 three-pointers a game. I mean, nearly 7 assists and 4.5 rebounds. Steph Curry was still awesome. The guy just wasn't as incredible as last year, so I think he got a little bit of crap for that. Now, to be fair, he did have a couple of stretches this season where he was actually struggling, but he's rewritten the ship, and, I mean, he still is a guy who can be a leader of an offense and be a strong all-around player. I mean, the guy is still Steph Curry, basically. And him being, I don't know, 75-80% of what he was last year is still a great player and still one of the best ones in the league, so I think he definitely has consideration for a 5th place in MVP voting here. Now, when we're talking about Giannis, I mean, you know the people who get banned in 2K because they make their players like 7-foot-tall mascots that can do everything? Giannis is like right around that stratosphere at the moment of 23 points, 9 rebounds, 5 assists, 1.5 steals, 2 blocks a game. Awesome on defense. One thing I like about Giannis is his ability to play off-ball. He's very willing to like set screens for others, which allows the Bucks offense to not just be like super stagnant and it's not, we'll give the ball to Giannis and then he'll just do something. Like, he actually involves himself in the flow of the offense, which is pretty cool. Also, at times, he can just go one-on-one or be in a pick and roll, and of course, he's a terror in the fast break, whether it be he actually dribbling the ball or him running and then him getting a pass from someone else. And I think Giannis' situation kind of mirrors Damian Lillard's a bit in the star player keeping the team afloat enough and then them just getting into the playoffs. Except Giannis just does more all around than Lillard. I mean, Giannis' defense this season was pretty damn good, and the playmaking between the two of them, I mean, they're about even, but Giannis just does more all around. So he was very good this season, and he's going to be running the NBA for the next decade plus, and he's probably going to win the actual MVP at some point. Probably more than one. And now we can get to John Wall. I have mentioned a couple times in this video about star players kind of keeping their teams afloat, or perhaps even going on a bit of a turnaround. John Wall did more than that, as it seemed the Wizards were just done this season. And then his combination of, again, being one of the best passers in the league, impossible to stop going to the basket, his improvements in the pull-up mid-range game and his three-pointer at least being a little more respectable, on top of his defense and overall leadership, the way that John Wall and the Wizards turned what seemed like a disappointing year into being one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference and probably a scary one going into the playoffs. I mean, that's just extremely impressive in John Wall. Finally, with Jimmy Butler, a whole lot of what the hell's going on with the Chicago Bulls this season. Rajon Rondo not being good, the roster having like no shooters on it whatsoever. I should mention Rondo's been better lately. I will give him that one. But the majority of the season he was not very good. But even through all of it, Jimmy Butler, awesome scorer, defender, 5.5 assists a game. He was very good. And his all-around play just kind of kept the Bulls lingering, and then they managed to get into the postseason. If I had to pick one guy, maybe I lean towards Isaiah Thomas, just given the offensive responsibility and the fact the Celtics finished with the 1 seed, but I don't know, maybe that's me being the biased Celtics fan. I think you could make a case for any one of these guys, really.